just get started. My name is Tara Clapp. I'm Senior Manager with the Columbia Basin Watershed Network program, and joining us today is Richard Johnson, who is Vice Chair of the Watershed Network and does a number of other things, and has been a long time active with mapping and with the mapping program. He teaches QGIS and he teaches aquifer interpretation, which also involves mapping. So let me just, there we go. So a few things before we begin. I know webinars can be, you can sometimes lose your connection. If you do lose your connection, just join back in again using the same link, and that should get you back in. Those of you who are attending are on what's called blanket mute, but we would like you to feel welcome to put your questions. It's actually the question and answer box in your little command bar. There's a thing called Q&A, and you can type in any questions that you have, and Richard and I are comfortable with interrupting each other, so we'll probably answer your questions as we go along. I will keep an eye on them. We should have time for a question period after we're done with the presentation, and just you can follow up after the webinar with questions or anything you might have by emailing me. And you can get this email off the Contact Us page on our website, or you can just write this down, cbwn.coordinator@gmail.com. So, this is us. I guess you've already got the pictures of us there. Let's see, Richard, would you like to introduce yourself a little more than I did?
No, I think you did a good job. I love mapping. I love talking about it, so I'll try not to go too long today, or to get too far off the topic. So I'll wait for a minute and then go straight into my spiel.
Okay. So our outline for today is Richard is going to speak first on basically the overall uses of digital mapping and figure out how people can use mapping for watershed stewardship. And then I will talk about exactly what the Columbia Basin Watershed Network Summer Mapping program is. We have a few options, but I'll just introduce the Summer Mapping program because we've got applications for that open right now. So with that, Richard and I are going to gracefully I'm going to transfer screens over to Richard, which last time, well, I'll just make him the host. Again, we figured out how to do this. This is, like I said, going to be really graceful. Okay, Richard, you're the host now.
Okay.
So you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, is my screen showing up now?
Give it a minute. I wonder if I need to stop sharing mine.
I'll hit share screen here. I think that's how we did it last time.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
there it
you
comes.
see my desktop? Okay. Then I will jump up a nice PowerPoint presentation here. There. Is that my introductory screen showing?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, people should feel free to use that question bar because this is informal presentation. So the feedback as we go is easier than trying to remember your question till the very end. So I've been working with this program and with mapping for quite a few years. With the Watershed Network, we've been running this program since 2008, I think it is. And so each year then we have a summer student from Selkirk College who is dedicated to this program. And your applications, after we sort them out and see what we can and can't do, get filtered to, or fed to that summer student, and then you'll be working directly with that mapper at Selkirk. And the more you know about what you want and what you're going to do with it, the better maps you're going to get. They're going to be more useful to you. So let me show you some examples that we've been producing under this for various organizations. And we'll start off with this one, quite a simple, extremely simple map. This one is just basically an outline of the watershed. You'll notice down in the bottom left-hand corners there that it's oriented to let people know where in the world it sits. Here's a more complicated map that we did last year. And this is the first point I want to make. In addition to having a lot more information on this map, you'll also notice that it's based on a satellite image. And these satellite images don't have to be a Google Earth satellite image. This one in particular was a Landsat, I believe. And you can see the amount of detail that has been put into this watershed. The watershed is outlined in orange there, and the creeks have been put in on top of the satellite image. And it shows the where the logging has been. That's that one little blue, or no, that's a lake, I'm sorry. But it does show cut blocks, and those can be put in there as well. So this is a type of map that you can plan from, or that you can make presentations of. Now, these maps will come in different sizes, and Selkirk College can print up to about 3 feet by 4 feet maps, which is big as a desktop almost. The desktop I'm sitting at is 3 feet by 6 feet. So it almost covers this desktop. And you've probably seen these at presentations. So if your organization needs that type of map, then this is the ideal program. So here's the same area. And now this time it's in more conventional topographic presentation, where it just shows the contour lines. But it also shows all the back roads in there. If you take a look at the top right-hand side there, you'll see the green lines, which are the logging roads. And the village or whatever Glade is, the little community of Glade, it sits right down at the bottom by the river. Under that same program, we also produced this map. Now this, a lot of people don't know that this type of thing is available, but this is a geological map, and it's showing where the stranded old riverbanks are. And I won't go into the detail of trying to interpret it for you, but just to let you know that this type of information is out there and can be presented on your maps as well. Here's a neat map produced by the Springer Creek people. And it shows the outline of the Springer Creek watershed. And I'll show you more about this particular watershed later on, because I've been doing some work on it. But look at the amount of detail that's on this particular map. The yellow outline is any rainfall that falls within that outline ends up down at the, flowing through the town of, or the village of Slocan and into Slocan Lake down at the bottom left. And you can see that there's cut blocks displayed in there. The old fire can be put on there. There was a Springer Creek fire. There's trails, a lot of detail on that. A lot of people want something that catches people's eyes. And so this particular map that I'm showing here shows all the watersheds that feed into the Slocan system. And they're all in gaudy colors. And you can make prettier colors if you want. And this is all controlled by you as the applicant or successful applicant. And This one, I love the gaudy colors because it's instantaneous. I can see which watershed that I'm talking about. Other people have gone to more subdued colors and it makes a little prettier presentation, but it really depends on what you want to use the map for. And this one is very useful to me to show people where the water is coming from. And you can't see the detail in here, but it actually has the acreage or the hectares under each of those watersheds. It names them and gives you information on the watershed itself. Now, this is one of the first ones done. This was done way back in 2008, I believe, for Lardo area. And this particular one is showing the wildlife habitat values, and that's all down around the north end of Kootenay Lake on the bottom right-hand side. Very simple map, but it makes a very simple presentation of what is happening there. Here's another one for the same area, and this was one's talking about fish, and so shows information on the fish streams. And here's another one for the same area. This is all, again, for Lardo. And this is talking about forest cover. And you can see that there's a lot of detail on that map. And when you're planning things in your watershed, having a map like this is very useful. Or if you're talking to people in a presentation or a community meeting, they can look at these things and understand a little more what's happening. This one shows some cut blocks in land. It's actually land use in the Salmo area. And sure, this got a fair amount of detail, but you'll see that the legend explains it to you. So this is another nice presentation map. Not in gaudy colors, it's actually quite tasteful. Now, Duhamel came at us with a very nicely worded request. And so the next 4 maps are very neatly done. They must have had some visual person working on it and saying this is what we'd like to do. But you'll see that in addition to the map itself, what's been put on here is the pie chart, which allows you to interpret it more quickly as well. Duhamel, if you're not familiar with it, is just up the west arm east of Nelson. So here's another showing the crown closures. So their interest and their problems have to do with forestry. So you'll see these are forest-oriented maps. This is another one that is very useful for people that are having landslides or after a burn in certain areas. And it's showing how stable the sides of that valley are. This is a steep-sided valley, and you can see where potential slides are going to happen. This is another one. This shows where the cut blocks have been, where the disturbances have been in the forest. So that's a nice suite of maps that Duhamel put together. This one is far more complicated, and it's got so much stuff on it, it's almost scary. But it apparently does the job and does what they wanted to do. This was done Mark and Matthew Creek over by Cranbrook. And you can see that there's a lot of information there. When you're thinking of maps, don't just think of big wall maps and presentations that you might want to have at meetings. Think of things that you can hand out. So instead of thinking in terms of these great big 3 by 4 foot maps that hang on the wall, here's a handout, and very tastefully done, very bright color that picks up your attention right away. And it's got the writing and the photo insert, and I really like this one, particularly because the color grabs your eye right away. This one was a unique one, but I want to, the reason I have it in here is to show you that there's a lot more information and a lot more things that you can do with maps than just make a presentation and picture what's happening. This one is tagged into a thing called iNaturalist. And when I first heard of this one, this was suggested by the Slocan Lake Stewardship Society. And they said, we want to know where the bugs and the birds and the wildlife are being seen. And there's a web application out there called iNaturalist, and you can tailor that tag into it and use their input system to for people to record the wildlife sightings that they have. So this was the presentation that was done for Slocan Lake Stewardship Society to advertise for people to start watching for moose on the side of the road and enter the data into iNaturalist. So it's a great way to get participation. I'd have never thought of this as being a map application until Ian Parfit said, oh yeah, we can do that. And it's extremely simple and extremely cheap to do this one. Here's another one to think about. This is a trifold. You can see by the way it's set up. This is one side of a presentation, a brochure that you can hand out to people. So it's got some mapping, but it also has this other stuff. So we're starting to blend from straight mapping into things that you might want to use that is more in line with graphic arts. This is an interesting one simply because of the funny white lines on it, but it did the job for the people that were using it. And I believe by the look of it, this is Columbia Lake. But it's an old satellite image, and this was is probably Landsat 7 imagery. The imagery is still good, but one of the sensors in the camera up on the satellite has died because the satellite's been up there so long. So you get these white lines across there where it's not recording. Just an interesting sidelight. And I promise not to get too far off the topic, so let me go back. Here's a nice one we did for the Lake Windermere Ambassador, showing satellite image of Lake Windermere with the various areas where it's actually the riparian area around the lake, showing the vegetation, the type of vegetation it's there. And here's another one where there's all kinds of things overlaid on it, and that's to show what's happening on sensitive habitat on Lizard Creek. So this is giving you an idea, hopefully, of the type of things that are out there. And here's a more conventional map, that is street map, and showing you the village of Slocan. But it, again, is for a specific purpose. This is the same area, and the reason I'm showing this one is to give you an idea of the information that's out there and available to you almost with the click of a button and for making presentations. The black outline has just recently been mapped by the province, and it's the area that they have mapped as having an aquifer underlying it. And the blue dots are the location of wells within that. So you can get water takeoff points, or in this particular case, it's all the wells that are in that same aquifer, and in fact, one of them is up above. And since I've been working on this area, here's another thing to not forget about, is you can overlay on Google Earth. Google Earth has some really nice features on it. And one of them is this three-dimensional perspective type of thing. So what I've done here is I've outlined the Springer Creek watershed. Everything within this red line is flowing down in Springer Creek and down through the village. But it's a nice way to present things. And also remember that you can use Google Earth to produce a fly-through of these areas. So if this was animated, and it can easily be done, you can smoothly fly towards that watershed and fly right up the valley, or you can turn to the right and fly down the Slocan River. And the summer student will make that into a nice, smooth presentation, whereas when I do it, it tends to be jerky and make sharp, bright corners and everything else. But they know a little bit more of what they're doing, and they can make a nice video for you. Now, because it's Easter, I put a yellow background on this, and because it's very colorful. This one is not, this particular map is just a clip that I picked out of some geological data. But if you have data like this in your files that you're aware of, you can have them build a map around it. Like if you put a border around that and legends and everything else on it, you'd use this as part of your presentation. So this is a geological map, but it's not in the government database. So now it's really Easter, and here's just a couple things that to finish off with. There's the size of it, and you can go from the 34 to 44 inch, or you can go right down to desktop size. And one of the things you make sure that you get is get the PDF version of all of these maps, because you can print more maps. You can take the your PDF into a print shop, in, for instance, Hall's Printing in Nelson. I've taken PDFs in there and had them print up the 34 by 44. And Tara, do you remember what it was? About $17 for that big map we did?
Oh, I think it's even less than that.
Yeah.
Because I know Friends of Kootenay Lake has actually used their Kootenay Lake watershed map as a sort of a fundraiser. So they get laminated and unlaminated, and they sell. People like maps, so they just sort of sell those, and I think they're $10 and $20 each. So they're not expensive to have printed.
Great, and so make sure you get that, and then the last line there is you can also get from them the raw data files. So anybody that's familiar with ArcGIS or QGIS, you can update your maps with time because you have all of the layer data that you need to make your new maps. So make sure you get that. Now on the Selkirk, let me just go and see whether I've got it. Yes. Look at the second yellow across there. There's the link to the Selkirk website. So I've just shown you some sample maps that I've found might spur your thoughts on it. But all of the maps that Selkirk has done for the Watershed Network under this program are all, I shouldn't say all because I think there's a couple missing, but there are, all the maps are there to look and see what other people have done and give yourself some ideas as to, wait a minute, I could really use a map like that. The other thing is IMAP BC is a government service, and it there's a link to it, and from it you can actually look at all of these different layers. You can find wells, you can find the location of all the takeoff points for water, you can find geology on it, you can find cut blocks. All of the data that the BC government has released under Data BC can be loaded as a layer in IMAP, and it's a very useful way to orient yourself. And then if you want some professional presentation of what you found, just come into our program. And let me just see whether I have here. There's a picture of IMAP BC. And if you look at here under data sources, you'll see add provincial layers. And if I click on that, it will take a second or two here to load it up. But there is all of the different layers that you can add. For instance, administrative boundaries. But if you open that up, you'll see that there's all kinds of subcategories in there, and click that again and you can get right down to the individual layers. And there are hundreds of layers, and the amount of forestry data out there is unbelievable. Anyway, that's an idea of what can be done with under this program. So back to you, Tara.
Okay, thank you, Richard. I'm going to, again, ever so gracefully, come back to my
Oh,
screen.
nice.
And that was much more graceful.
Yes. And there is the,
Oops.
there's, when I talk about layers, there's what I'm talking about. A map is composed of all these different layers, and you can combine them in all kinds of ways. Anyway, enough from my end.
Right. So yes, this is, I think, let me see, I really have no idea. I haven't had any questions yet. So but if any of you need want to ask those questions, those sort of really basic questions that we might just be using the words, and for example, layers, for digital mapping. So just feel free to write those questions in. So yes, this is a sort of an introductory image about what those information layers are that we're talking about. And this is part of the beauty of digital mapping, is that you can combine those and make them, you know, help you see what the interaction is between, for example, land use and water. So that's really what we're talking about here. So yes, those are our layers. So we have actually a few, the Watershed Network has a few different offerings in mapping. We've been talking mostly about our summer mapping program, which, like Richard says, we've been doing in some form or other since 2008 with the Selkirk Geospatial Research Center at Selkirk College. And at the moment, we help 4 of our member groups per year. Now, if you're not sure that if you belong to a member group or not, you can email me and ask. Each of those groups or projects that the groups outline gets, you know, we have a meeting and we talk about this, but you get about 2 weeks of mapping work by a co-op student who's near graduation in the GIS program there. So the thing I wanted to mention is that if there's a larger thing you have in mind in terms of using satellite data or exploring how you can analyze something using geographic information, it might be appropriate for a thesis project. And for that, we talk to someone on the science advisory committee like Richard, help get that project scoped out, and that program typically has a fall intake, although there might be some students doing their thesis in the spring, but I think we typically look for those projects in the fall. So I just wanted to mention that. There's, for the summer mapping program, we have an online application form, and I didn't put the website up there, but you can email me for the link to that. It's a SurveyMonkey survey, and we need to have someone from your group to work with the summer student over the summer. We need a description of what you'd like to map, and we can actually help you work out, express exactly what that would be. So some of the things that Richard has just shown are base maps, and some of them focus on land use or roads. And then one thing what question are you interested in? Like, are you interested in how forestry is impacting, or how urban development is impacting your water, or, you know, a sense of what question you're interested in? That'll really help the scoping committee, the selection process, and the student. And then what kind of data do you have that you might like to add, or what kind of data would you like the student to try to find to add? And so what we do is we sit down and we meet and we talk about it, how we can sort of help you work out a project that's going to meet your needs. A lot of these are actually for communication, like the ones that Richard was showing, brochures and trail maps. They're mostly for communication, and some of them are, like the Duhamel, is for analysis. So we try to figure this out. So we try, and we have to do it within the scope of the summer mapping project. So that means in terms of how much time and how complicated the analysis is, we try to make that workable for the group and the student. Time is, of course, you know, someone needs to be available. So we have, as part of the application form, you know, when will you be available to work with the co-op student over the summer. And we use that to help select, because we can't select 4 projects where the people are only available at the beginning of the summer. So we like to have some flexibility on that. So our main selection criteria is that it's a member group. We do have a priority for groups that haven't had the mapping done before. We do work with groups a second time. That's just our priority. And we do have a preference for projects that are going to be what I call used in the community. So there's a plan about how the information is going to go from your hands out to the community, whether it's engagement, whether it's working with your friendly local government officials, or how are you going to use that project. And I just thought I just like Albert Einstein. I just thought I'd define scoping. So scoping is another word we use. It's the process of setting boundaries on a question or problem. And so that's a very important process in terms of getting you the map that you want. So you have enough on there, but not so much that it's distracting or equally as complicated as the actual world. So that's what we do in scoping. And here's our program link. It talks a little bit more about what we do for mapping support. It is, of course, possible to learn how to do your own mapping. Richard instructs in a software called QGIS, but you need to have a fair degree of, well, I think you need some computer skills and some sort of commitment to learn how to do that. It's not impossible, but it takes some time and some, I'd say, passion. So anyway, there's those 3 options. So I did want to mention that this program is supported by the Columbia Basin Trust. They support us, and they support the summer student to do this work for us. So I think.
Can I add one more thing, Tara?
Absolutely. Because
I didn't have any pictures of it, but LiDAR imagery is becoming more freed up. And so sometimes has access to LiDAR image that you and I don't. And so with LiDAR, you can get a lot more detail on your mapping program. So don't forget about LiDAR as being a possibility. And the other is there's so much more satellite imagery out there that there's a lot can be done with satellite imagery. And thirdly, and this is one that we have done a little bit of work with, is getting drone data. And that's a little bit beyond our mapping program, but it's possible we could work some drone imagery into here. It might take a few dollars added from somebody else, but it's a possibility. And using a drone to photograph or to take a video of your, say, a wetland that you're reconstructing, you can get a 3D output from it. In other words, a model that'll sit on the tabletop, printed out, and you can actually feel the bumps in your wetland.
Yes, the